This is part 2 of my Purple Exploding Star Quilt series. When we finished last time, I had just sewn all of my 10 3/4 inch squares and double X's. So our next step today is going to be to cut all of those in half, straight on a diagonal down that line that we made. And after I do that, I'm going to turn them and I'm going to cut them on the other diagonal. So I've cut them into 4 pieces at this point. Now that I'm finished cutting that, I'm going to take my favorite little tool, my shape cut, and I'm going to use that 45-degree angle that it's showing me right here. And I'm going to line up the top of my triangle. Then I can just take the line that's straight in the center, put my rotary cutter there, and cut it straight in half. So that makes a total of 8 pieces. So you can see here that I'm lining it up a little under the edge of the fabric. And that's because I'm lining it up with my seam. I don't prefer this method, but I'm just showing you here that you can do that. Another option, if you don't have a shape cut, is to use your quilting ruler and find that 45-degree angle line on there, line it up on the edge, and just cut straight down the middle of your triangle. And here you can see all the different types of blocks that I have in this quilt. Next up, we have the absolute most important step of any quilting journey, which is pressing seams. We press and iron and press and iron more than anything else. It took me an entire day to do this. Just this section took me an entire day. There's 256 blocks to start off this quilt, so it took a very long time. I don't own a seam roller yet, so I had to do this by hand. So I tried to finger press it to try and make the actual ironing process go a little faster, but it didn't seem to speed up my overall process. The next step we have is trimming up the blocks. So after I've pressed them, I get these little wings in the corners. So I'm going to line up my quilting ruler and I'm going to cut off those little wings. And then I'm going to line it up on the correct size measurements here. And I'm going to trim off the excess to make sure that every block is the correct size before we start piecing them together. The more you trim and iron and square up as you go, the more square the quilt's going to be in the long run. If you have to square up the entire quilt at the very end because you didn't do any on the way, you're probably going to lose a lot of design and it's going to be wacky. Next, we have my absolute favorite step, and that is to organize all the pieces. So the first thing I'm doing here is I'm dividing my quilt top into chunks to piece it. So I divide by half on each side and then into quarters on each side to make a total of 16 chunks of 16 squares. The most important part of this is to find a method that works for you. You need to be organized, or else you're just going to have pieces all over the place and it's going to be a big mess. The more organized you are, the more stress-free this process is, and the easier everything's going to go together. So once I get it all pieced together, I'm going to have to label it. I make little labels out of paper with coordinating numbers, and I just pin those onto my stacks. And then after I piece it together, I pin it onto my piece. And then I'm going to number here 1 through 4 across the top and 1 through 4 down the side. So the first block I'm going to work on right here is going to be 1-1. This is my method. You don't have to use the same method. So I'm going to make 4 stacks right here with my 4 lines. And then I'm going to stack them. My first line is going to be on top, and the 4th line will be on the bottom. If that works for you, great. If something else works for you, that's great too. I prefer making big blocks. A lot of people do rows. They piece an entire row and then piece the rows together. I find that that's a little overwhelming for me, and I prefer to do it in chunks. And I have better luck lining up my seams this way. It's not traditional, but it's what works for me. That's all that really matters when it comes to quilting, is what works for you. Everyone can make suggestions, but if it doesn't work for you, then find something that does. And I changed my method midway through this, and I started going from the bottom of what's going to be on the bottom of my stack and going to what's going to be on the top, so that I didn't have to keep flipping things over and lining it up. So you see my method change here. But once I get everything for that block, I take a pin and I pin on my label, and then I take a little clip. You can put it in a bag, whatever works for you, and I just clip it all together. And I go through and I do all of mine this way. You can see this one, I just completely started from the end of the bottom of my pile and just worked my way back to where it's going to start. All right, so now you can see at the end here, and I'm going back through. I had one extra square, and I was trying to figure out if I had missed something somewhere. So I was counting each of my stacks and make sure that each stack had 16 pieces, and then I was just stacking them up neatly. Turns out I just cut an extra square. So I did all of this and ended up just having an extra square. But I made sure that I had everything I needed, and I went on. So next time we'll be piecing these chunks together and going on from there. I have a couple different methods for piecing. I'm going to show you my favorite, and I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe and follow. I will see you next time. Happy quilting.